All right, here are my thoughts on the NRA's response to the Las Vegas attack in regards to bump fire stocks, as well as the statements of some Republicans. All right, I completely disagree with it. And before someone goes commenting, making that same old vague statement that they can't articulate, that, well, the NRA is just playing chess while y'all are playing checkers. Y'all just don't know what they're doing. Y'all don't get it. Bullshit. You're playing checkers. We're playing chess. Let me explain that. We just had 8 years of playing defense on the Second Amendment under the Obama administration. Why the hell are we doing that now with Republicans in charge? I mean, in 2013, after the horrible tragedy of Sandy Hook, where innocent children were killed, which pulled on the heartstrings of a lot of American people, and rightfully so, in which, again, we would be more than willing to compromise on gun control if it actually worked at preventing innocent children from ever being murdered or the victims of violent crime again, or citizens in general. But that's not the case. Gun control only makes it safer for criminals and tyrants. Criminals don't obey laws. But I don't want to digress to that point. We all know that. But even then, back in 2013, when Democrats controlled the Senate and we had a Democrat president, Obama, who was anti-gun, even then, gun control did not make it out of the Senate. Didn't even make it out of the Senate, which Democrats controlled. And the NRA's stance was stand and fight. We do not compromise. So again, how in the hell does it make sense to now show weakness and take a weak stance of, well, we're okay with, we think the ATF should restrict and regulate bump stocks even though it's not under color of law, but we think they should because it replicates or simulates automatic fire. How does that make sense now? Because now you've just given political cover to moderate Republicans and Democrats who maybe aren't quite as flamingly anti-gun as Dianne Feinstein, who's going to introduce anti-gun legislation no matter what, anytime a tragedy occurs. I mean, that's all she does. She just sits around and plots on how to restrict your rights and make you less free. That evil witch, that's all she's got to do. So how does that make sense to do that now, to show weakness? Most of us have maintained contact in the SHARE Act and National Reciprocity and the Hearing Protection Act, which was part of the SHARE Act, but that had a ton of support behind it. You had companies like Daniel Defense behind the Hearing Protection Act. I mean, you had a lot of people. You had a lot of co-sponsors in Congress and in the Senate. There's a lot of momentum. And it almost seems, and again, most of us kept in contact with our representatives and senators to pass that legislation. And it almost seemed like Republican leadership dragged their feet on it, because this is the second time this year that pro-gun legislation has been delayed or canceled on being voted on or being heard in the House because of a shooting tragedy, the first one being the baseball field attack. So, and I don't mean to sound like I'm making some crazy theory up off the top of my head, but it almost seems like that. I mean, because it seems like Republican leadership doesn't want to pass pro-gun legislation. If so, we need to do something about that politically, and I'll explain that here in just a minute. The second reason that's nonsense about the NRA playing chess while we're playing checkers, we're the ones thinking steps ahead. The petition on whitehouse.gov to repeal the NFA received 281,454 signatures. So how are we going to repeal the NFA or even repeal the Hughes Amendment, which the NRA claimed was a high priority at one time, if we're going along with the narrative that bump fire stocks need to be heavily regulated by the ATF outside color of law simply because they simulate automatic fire? That's a load of crap. Banning inanimate objects for the actions of a person, that's the same logic the anti-gunners use. Why should we ever be okay with that? And just a little side note for Republicans and people in Congress, I'm sure you're already getting a lot of phone calls and emails and letters about this by angry gun owners opposing that gun control would even be considered in a Republican Congress. But the only reason you don't have even more and you're not receiving more, or maybe not quite as many as you did in 2013, is one, because a lot of gun owners and conservatives have let their guard down because they have been a little too trusting in Republicans controlling the Congress and the Senate and the White House, and not being vigilant. Two, because most of us think bump fire stocks are stupid, as they change the basic fundamentals of trigger control, basic marksmanship fundamentals, and they're not very accurate. However, with that being said, we still don't think they should be banned, because people should be able to enjoy them in terms of people who've never served in the military and had a chance to fire automatic guns in the military like I have. People who don't have thousands of dollars, myself included, I don't have that kind of money to buy a pre-86 fully automatic firearm. Or people who just aren't on a big department SWAT team. It's ridiculous. So they should be able to. And three, this legislation that's been introduced is very vague. So I assure you a lot more people will be really pissed come election time if they can't get their aftermarket trigger or their competition trigger or their short reset trigger, none of which make the gun anything near full automatic. But because this legislation is so vague, if it's banned, if it passes and it's banned, then I promise you they'll be pissed and they'll remember come election time. And now the NRA is kind of walking back their statement a little bit, kind of backpedaling, not really, but saying, well, what we meant was Congress should focus on carry reciprocity, not bump stocks. Let the ATF decide on this. Well, if that's what that'd be all well and good if that's what they actually said at first, but they actually advocated for the ATF to place restrictions on bump stocks, which is unacceptable. What the NRA should have done and should immediately do now is say, look, the American people put Republicans in charge because they were tired of hearing about gun control all the time the last 8 years. They wanted people in office who were going to defend and support restoration of their Second Amendment rights. Stop talking about considering gun control. Knock that shit off. It's unacceptable. Stop delaying on pro-gun legislation like the SHARE Act and the Hearing Protection Act and national reciprocity. Put it on the calendar. Pass it. And then move on to the next law. You can't, if you guys can't even repeal Obamacare, at least, like you campaigned on, all of you campaigned on repealing Obamacare. If you can't keep your promise on that, at least keep your promise on supporting and defending the Second Amendment. And if you can't, then what is the point? What was the point in voting for you? And it's unacceptable. And if people like Paul Ryan want to continue down the road they've been on, then the NRA needs to maybe have them challenged in a primary. I'm hoping Paul Ryan will start being reasonable. But there's hope in reality, so we'll see what happens. But you had, after the Charlottesville attack, Paul Ryan wanted to talk about gun control, even though guns had nothing to do with it. Unacceptable. And that was before the Las Vegas attack. Then, of course, after the Las Vegas attack, he wanted to sit here and say he's okay with bump fire stocks bans. A bump fire stock ban. Again, completely unacceptable. Knock this shit off. But then, as if that isn't insulting enough, he goes on and says he's pulling the SHARE Act from consideration. Again, knock this nonsense off. Completely unacceptable. Do what you said you were going to do. Stop caving on gun control. We had 8 years of that. And start pushing and supporting for pro-Second Amendment legislation. If not, then maybe he needs to be challenged in a primary where someone like Roy Moore can pull off an upset against the establishment like Roy Moore did in Alabama. Maybe someone like him in Paul Ryan's district could do something similar. And if his big money prevails, then maybe the NRA, just in that district alone, should encourage voters in his district to vote Democrat, just to see, and then everyone else in the rest of the country still vote Republican in Congress. That way we get him out of there. Again, I'm hoping he'll start being reasonable and do what he said he was going to do. But again, there's hope in reality, and it's better to plan for other likelihoods. But we'll cover that another time in more detail. Now, with that being said, I don't really have an opinion right now. I'm still forming one as to whether or not people should cancel their NRA memberships at this time. To some degree, they're obviously still a very valuable asset to represent us, but compromising is unacceptable. So I guess I'll have to wait and see how this plays out. But if this kind of stuff passes, if gun control of any kind passes in a Republican Congress, thanks to them, then that's unacceptable. So again, I'd like to see how this plays out before I form an opinion there. However, I don't think any other mistakes should be tolerated at all. Now you've had some. Now, regardless of whether you maintain your NRA membership or even have one to begin with, even if you do have one, I still think you should join Gun Owners of America, as they are completely no compromise and they've never let me down in the past. You've had some people out there claim that no other organization, these are the same people who keep buying the two-party lie, and then wonder why Republicans won't repeal Obamacare or pass pro-gun legislation. But saying that Gun Owners of America and other gun organizations aren't worth anything, but they are, because they actually have people. Gun Owners of America actually have people in contact with people in Congress and with senators to get pro-gun legislation passed and to get gun control bills defeated, despite what some people say or claim. As a matter of fact, again, back in 2013, Democrats blamed Gun Owners of America for gun control setback. Harry Reid, who was the Senate Majority Leader when the Democrats had control of the Senate, the guy who was pretty much in control of the Senate, said, the NRA, their lobbying efforts are being pushed even further to the extreme by virtue of the fact that there's another organization called Gun Owners of America. Whenever the NRA tries to be reasonable, the Gun Owners of America becomes more unreasonable, and it pushes the NRA to the right. That's coming from the guy who controlled the Senate and was pushing for gun control. So yeah, I'd say they're actually a lot more influential than some people would claim. With that being said, stay in contact with your congressmen and your senators. Demand that gun control not even be considered, and that they put pro-gun legislation like the SHARE Act and national reciprocity back on the calendar and get it passed now.